Good morning and welcome to the final week of Illinois Soybean Association's Agribusiness Management Summer Webinar Series. I'm Jessie Shootman, Field Staff for Illinois Farm Business Farm Management and one of the AMP advisors for ISA. AMP is a new program from ISA. It's an educational resource for farmers and ag professionals to hear the latest agribusiness advice and receive guidance on their business needs. This summer, we have offered the AMP webinar series as a free 5-week program where experts have shared agribusiness advice on topics including succession planning, grain marketing, and more. Today is our final session and closing keynote with Bob Rhea on planning for success, G.R.I.T, G-R-I-T. But before we get started, we wanted to review a few housekeeping items to help make this the best virtual experience possible. You can ask questions of the presenters or ISA webinar staff utilizing the GoToWebinar dashboard on the right side of your screen. If you're having audio or technical issues, please alert the staff through that dashboard as well. And now I'd like to take some time to introduce David Wessel, At-Large Director for ISA, and give him a few minutes for words from the board.
Thanks, Jessie, and for all the work you've done on this program this summer. Good morning and welcome to the 2020 Virtual AMP Webinar Summer Series. We are excited that you could join us from the comfort and safety of your homes and offices. My name is David Wessel. I'm an at-large director for the Illinois Soybean Association Board. I reside in Chandlerville, Illinois and West Central Illinois. I serve as the chairman of the ISA Production and Outreach Committee. I farm with my father and my wife, Tama, and we have 2 children and 1 grandson. We raise corn, soybeans, wheat, cattle, and hay on our 100% no-till farm. And it is my pleasure to share a few words on behalf of the Illinois Soybean Association Board and staff. This is the inaugural year for ISA's AMP program, an agribusiness management educational platform paid for by your soybean checkoff dollars. While we had originally intended to make this an in-person event throughout the summer, we, along with all of you, are adapting and making the best of this challenging year and are happy to provide you with this virtual learning experience. Our hope is that soybean farmers and agribusiness professionals can use AMP as a go-to source for advice and guidance. Through AMP, we hope the farmers and farm families find peace of mind for the decision-making, endurance in running their operations, and legacy and ability to see their farming operations through to the next generation. We believe that farmers are leaders both for their family farming operation and the agricultural industry. And the AMP webinars deliver information that's needed for today, for this season, and for farming operations for years to come. And that is checkoff money being well spent. I encourage you to stay tuned to future AMP program offerings and communications by checking us out at ilsoyadvisor.com. Speaking of IL Soy Advisor, I hope that many of you are making use of our year-round agronomic source for farmers, agronomists, CCAs, and soybean stakeholders. Here you can find information on upcoming events, webinars, and useful information to boost your soybean production needs. After each webinar you attend, I ask that you please take a few minutes to complete the post-event online survey. Check your email for this link. We make improvements to our offerings based off your responses. So we encourage you to tell us how we are doing. The AMP Summer Webinar Series was made possible through generous support of the Illinois Soybean Association Checkoff Program and our AMP partnership with Farm Business, Farm Management, and University of Illinois Farm Docksite. We also are proud of our AMP webinar series sponsors, including Farmer Mac, Compeer Financial, and Country Financial. For today's webinar, we are especially thankful for Compeer Financial. We simply could not do what we do without the support of our wonderful ag industry that we all work in. And in closing today, we're all here to learn. We're here to learn how to become better farm managers, how to set up our operations for generational success, and to learn new ways to run our farms like the businesses they are. Listen, take notes, and most importantly, ask questions. Let's all find a few ideas today that we can take back and put to work on our farms. Thank you again for joining us. We're glad to have you, and we hope you walk away with lots of useful information and ideas to improve your operation. Thank you for supporting the AMP program, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Have a good day.
Thank you, David, for those comments. The soybean checkoff support of this program, along with our partners, is invaluable to its success. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the day, which will be our keynote speaker, Bob Rhea. Bob has assisted farmers with accounting, tax, and consulting services in West Central Illinois through the Illinois Farm Business Farm Management Association since 1984. He's a veteran tax preparer. Bob also completes business analysis reports and detailed financials for Illinois farm families, as well as visiting almost 300 farm businesses each year. Bob is an instructor at the University of Illinois Tax School and was recently named the CEO of Illinois FBFM. Bob, you can take it from here.
Oh, very good, Jesse. Thank you for that introduction. And David, your opening remarks were right on target with what FBFM strongly believes in as well. We have about 70 staff members around the state that work with 12,000 farm families every day in the area of farm finances and a lot about education. So I think those opening comments really set the stage for the next 50 minutes we'll spend together today talking about grit, what has required all of us in the past few months to find a new level of grinding it out, of seeking good relationships, of being innovative, and searching for the best talent that we can find in our farm family businesses so that we can win the day as best that we can. So today we're going to talk about some of the farm financial conditions that exist and some looks ahead to 2020 and even to 2021 as we have some new information just released today that we'll share with you as well that affects all of our soybean producers in our fine state of Illinois. Well, let me tell you a little about our location here. We are in Camp Point, and if we jump to the Google Maps, you'll see there's our office just on Highway 24 in far western Illinois. I'll zoom out some here so you can see we're near Quincy, which is our local metropolis. We are about 2.5 hours north of St. Louis, and on the far western part, actually our office is in effect west of St. Louis. So we're in the far regions of the state of Illinois over here on the western side. It's a beautiful day in Camp Point. I think it was 55 degrees earlier today. I'm sure everyone's experiencing a beautiful August day to work on our farms today. GRIT is the acronym I've used to kind of encapsulate our presentation today, as we want to talk about some of the key pieces that are affecting our farm families. And we'll wrap these all around financial pieces as well, and talk about some of the FBFM data that we've collected for 2019 and what that means for us going forward as we look about results for 2020 and 2021. We've certainly been encapsulated ourselves with lots of acronyms all year as we thought about lots of new programs coming our way and how we deal with tax and finance pieces that are affecting all of us daily. But the first one I talk about is the grind. And I might have even used grateful as the G piece as well. I'm sure we're grateful for the health that we each share today. We're mindful that that is a fleeting item that can move from us at any moment. But we're really not focused at the moment about how we've had to grind it out the last few months. And if you think about your farm families, you think about your employees, you think about your customers or your vendors that work with you, hasn't everybody just had to take on a new grind that's never existed before? Information changing on a daily basis, new processes, delays, new rules that are affecting us. I just saw some rules a moment ago that the university is putting out for the faculty and staff on campus. And it's going to be difficult to get work done as we normally think about it. It's been a grind the last few months that started for us in earnest in mid-March when our FBFM offices essentially closed to the public, and we changed our work schedules, we stopped taking appointments. And for us, and I'm sure for you, that was a major distinction because we're accustomed to gathering financial information face to face. We want to see what's going on. We want to understand the things that people put in their records. We like to have that personal touch, but it's been unavailable for several months, and we're adapting. We're using it, but it's all part of the grind that we've had to deal with in the last few months. And we'll keep grinding it out going forward as we dig into more pieces. Well, here's part of the grind that you deal with every day, a pandemic year or not. This is the first set of data I'd like to share with you. And this is a very simplistic financial economic study, isn't it? Spend less than you earn. And here are 6 years I picked sort of at random to show you the results that we've seen with our FBFM cooperating farmers. So in 2006, for example, net income was slightly over $100,000 and living expenses were about $60,000. So in that year, they spent less than they earned. The same in 2010, that was a pretty good income year. 2014, also better. We earned more than the spending, but you notice the spending had increased in that 8-year period about $28,000. 2015 was the lowest earnings year on our FBFM database that goes back more than 50 years. And that's the first time we've plugged a loss in as net farm income. And we still had spending of $84,000, so we spent more that year. In 2017, spent more than was earned. 19, we spent more than was earned. I did happen to look, in 16 it was about break even, and in 2018 the earnings were higher than spending. But notice the general basic concept: spend less than you earn. And for the last 3 years, or at least 3 of the last 5 years, it's been difficult to have earnings greater than our spending requirements. This next slide describes the fact of a longer look at net farm income on our Illinois farms back to the early 90s. And you can see we had a very good run up, which they've called the ethanol period from 03 to 2012 and 13. And then we had a pretty large crash, and you see 15, it even shows a slightly positive there, but most studies will report that as a negative. And then a variety of income and losses here from 16, 18, and 19. We'll look at more details in a moment. And one of the things we're looking at is what's going to happen in 2020 for incomes to be about zero. We had a price forecast of $3.90 for corn, $9 for soybeans. An MFP payment would be required, or above trend yields would push income back to the positive level. So we're partway through the harvest season. I'd ask you, or through the growing season, we'd ask you to think about prices and yields and forecasts for government program payments. We'll talk more about those in a moment. But are we going to be better this year as net income, or will we be lower? This is the real detailed look at net farm income from 2006. And you'll notice I put a green star on 2012. That was the highest year on record ever, and followed in 2015 with the lowest year on record ever. So you talk about a whipsaw effect. In 3 years, we saw a major shift in farm economics. The far right side, I think, are also key points as we look at different time periods for farm financial performance. 03 to 09, which was just before and just after the ethanol phase kicked in and boosted prices, net farm income about 120,000. In the really strong years from 10 to 14, over 200,000 average income. But since 2014, the recent 5 years are only at a $67,000 average net income. So farms are absolutely profitable. The challenge we have is, are they profitable enough? If living expenses exceed $67,000, we're losing equity, we're losing working capital. We have to put income taxes in there, and debt service affects the cash flow requirements for a farm operation too. So we've gone from a really decent period to an outstanding period to a period that, although profitable, isn't quite making the mark that we would like. So we're interested through the AMP program to find out more about financial planning, making sure our farms can beat the average, making sure we know all the numbers, and help increase that number, because in the last few years, we've just been treading water. Financial positions of grain farms. This is as of December 31 of 2018, and our source is our FBFM data, but I thank Dr. Gary Snitke for grabbing this together. And At the bottom of the slide, you see the key partners that are existing in this program. And FBFM is excited to be a part of this. Farm Doc, Gary and Scott Irwin, and Jonathan Compass, Nick Paulson. They're a great group of people that use our data and really make it come to life. So we know what all these numbers really mean as we push that down to the farm. They also can access the policymakers and let policy people know, here's what's really happening from information gathered on a daily basis from farm families. And this is one type of report that comes out from their research. So this is only measuring debt to asset categories. And you see the green, yellow, and red. You know, the lower number, the better. That means you have lower debts compared to your assets. There were 20% of the farms that were less than 0.1. You know, that's super strong. My goodness. They'll have lots of expansion opportunities. They'll have lots of succession opportunities. They'll feel very good about their financial position. From 0.1 to 0.3, almost 40% of the farms in that category. Also, green light, strong. They will be able to access capital. They will be able to transition their business, bring on a partner, buy a piece of land. Those debt to asset ratios are low enough to allow for expansions. Then from 0.3 to 0.5, almost another 30% of our farms. You know, this will vary a lot if they're at 30 or 50 on the financial success, the financial threats, the financial opportunities that will come to them. And then we have about 12% that are over 0.5. Those are the ones that will need attention and are trying, I know, working hard to try to get better than average and improve their conditions. Working capital, those are $1,000 for each of these farms. So if they had a low debt to asset ratio, the working capital is $852,000. Again, very strong. You can see they have 1,600 acres. If they're into the red category, they're also exhibiting negative working capital. Not a big difference in the amount of acres that are rented, but you know, a slight adjustment to higher for those with the higher debt to asset ratios, and they're obviously renting more land on a cash rental basis. Probably no surprise either that the higher debt to asset ratios belong to the younger farm sets, and the lower debt to assets belong to the older farm sets. Just more years of earnings, more years of paying off debt, and they might have been farming, you know, through the right period of time to generate those larger earnings we saw exhibited. Timing is absolutely critical to the long-term success of a farm's generation. You know, those years from 2010 to 2014, farms who are up and operating at full capacity there probably had an opportunity to set their stage for a very successful multi-decade run of financial success. We know margins are thin. We've talked about that at the moment. And here's just a simple example of about a 1,000-acre farm of the expenditures they incurred in 2019. $518,000 for all their operating expenses, $130,000 for capital purchases, machinery, buildings, items like that. They spent $129,000 on taxes and living. And I think in this example it was about $90,000 on living and the rest of it in tax. A total of $777,000 spent. And if our goal is to improve net profit and improve working capital, one of the choices we have is lowering costs. Well, how do we bite off this big $777,000 budget a year? Well, you do it a step at a time. And so I laid out 4 different pieces that you might think about considering. So a 2% reduction only saves $15,000, but probably relatively easy to find. It's going to be really hard probably to find a 20% reduction to save $155,000 for this farm's budget. But maybe they can find 4 or 5 or 8 2%ers and make that result be $60,000 net improvement to the bottom line. If I was looking at a budget for the year, that's the way I would sort of think about it. How can I cut 2% 3 or 4 times in my operation and see if that does enough to improve my financial competitiveness the way I would like it to look. Relationships are another really key factor. Relationships mean a lot to our farm families as we think about, well, the families that work with us every day, as we think about the vendors who provide supplies, materials, financing, accounting services, any vendor who helps you on your farm operation. Those relationships are vital. Right across the street from our office that I showed you in Camp Point is a local co-op, and they're building a $1.5 million grain storage facility. So they value their relationship in our community. They value their relationship with the farmers they're going to do business with this fall. We think that this relationship piece is even more critical given the first piece I mentioned about grind. When you grind this piece out and are missing your normal activities, the relationships you have with landlords, employees, and family members is more critical. We want to be sure we gather those in the best manner possible and boost their roles as best we can. Even though we're grinding out a very difficult piece, we know the relationships are going to be very key for our success. I'm going to show you up on the wall a couple of new pieces. I'm going to slide this camera along here with me a little bit, but this just came out today. And let me show you what our good friend, Dr. Gary Snicki, just put up together for us. I'm going to make sure that I can see what I have here. All right, very good. All right, you should be able to see all right, terrific. And I don't know if you'll be able to read all my writing, but this just came out. I didn't have a chance to put it in my PowerPoint. But this is cost projections for 2021 from Dr. Snicki. So he has for 2021, he's projecting a yield on soybeans of 62 bushels an acre. And I know earlier this morning, they just issued some of those projections from around the nation and the state. And I think Illinois came in a little bit higher than that number. But you follow the agronomic pieces probably stronger than I do. But we'll start with 62. He plugged in a price for the year of $8.50. And I noticed last night our elevator across the street was $8.85 is what they were paying here in Camp Point. So maybe we can beat the $8.50 a little bit. That turned into a gross revenue projected for 2021 of $557 an acre, compared with $627 for this year, $617 for 19, $700 for 2018. He projected total costs for the year at $354 for everything except your land cost. He has that plugged in at $253 for the land piece, and he ends up with a net return of a loss of $50 per acre. A loss of 50 is his projection at the moment for 2021 soybean production in central and northern Illinois. Well, that's an average projection, so our chance will be here. How do we beat that? Can we boost the yield? Can we boost the price? Can we lower the cost? Can we beat the land cost of $253? And can we beat the net of minus $50 an acre? In this, there's a $30 ARC, PLC, or other type of government program payment included. That gets me to the $557 gross revenue. The other operating costs are relatively stable from 18, 19, 20, and 21. Just a few dollars per acre of change. Land values, he has the same in 18, 19, 20, and 21. The 18 result, instead of a loss of 50, was a profit of $138, a very good bean year. Of course, that had a yield of 67 and a price of $9.27. So here's a projection for 2021. And one of our challenges with our relationships coming forward will be, what can we do to find an improved relationship, to boost price, to boost yield, to lower costs, to otherwise improve our bottom line, so that we can get back, instead of a minus 50 I put up on the board, we can get back to a positive return in 2021. I think we're already thinking a lot about 2021 and how we're going to get there. All right, very good. Let's look at some of the relationship pieces. Gross revenue that I mentioned, I want to highlight the historical pieces of that for us here today. These go back to 2010. Bean yield is first, then bean price, and gross revenue per acre. 2012, the hallmark year, there's the record, 691 gross revenue per acre, just in bushels times price. There would be government payments, crop insurance, other pieces on top of this that might exist in your farm operation. But for here, it's just yield times price, gross revenue for the key. For 2018, that came in at $529 an acre in gross revenue. The 2019 numbers came in very similar to that. Those had a yield of 62 and a price of about 880. So we're in the lower $500 range. And if you, again, look at 15 through 18, oh, I'm sorry, see my slide just doesn't have the right number there. I have 17 in there twice. Well, the 19 number is really the 59 bushel. The 18 number is 68,922. Apologies for that. So if you look at 15 through 19, which is the last row on the slide, gross revenues of around $500 an acre, maybe $550 would be the norm, with one outlier there at $627. And the time period before that, the norm would have been much closer to $600 plus. So we've lost somewhere in the $75 to $100 per acre gross revenue in our calculations. A more detailed look at per bushel cost and returns is this slide. The pink number is the cost number that is moving up the last couple of years and has exceeded revenue, or the price received at least, of the last few years as well. The other costs are relatively flat, relatively stable. A jump in 2012 as prices went up, input costs jumped as well. But really from 14 to 19, relatively stable cost per bushel for all those other items. Total costs are running up, prices are declining, and we are exhibiting narrow and negative margins in soybean production on Illinois farms on the average. And I want to stress that on the average. I'll show you a slide a bit later that really highlights why average is not acceptable anymore. Cash rents from our friends at NASS and USDA, a chart showing the trend in cash rents. You see the typed amounts for 17, 18, and 19, all slightly under $225 an acre. Oh my goodness, look at back 1970, under $50 an acre. And then there was our first sort of economic run up into the late 70s when the rents pushed over $125 an acre. And I'm sure my grandfather farming at the time thought $100 cash rent was a crazy, crazy idea. But obviously we've jumped beyond that and in the 200 plus range as a normal rents here in Illinois going forward. So how do we combat that? You have to have a good relationship with your landlord. The landlord has to understand that for them to be successful, the tenant also needs to be successful. As we're producing an acre of soybeans, we have to share in the profitability and the risk to make that production effort bountiful for both parties. Your suppliers can be helpful in helping control costs as another valuable relationship. This creative lease slide I'm sharing with you is one farm I'm familiar with that is using a flex type lease arrangement. And this has been going on for this farm since 2012 or 13, I think. They have a base rent. This was a 2018 year when it was last in soybeans, and it is again in 2020. But here was the result for 2018. The base rent was $200 an acre. That was paid in advance by the tenant about April 15th, 100% paid in advance. The rent agreement applied for a bonus to be paid to the landlord when gross revenue exceeded $550 per acre, and the landlord would receive 1/3 of that extra gross revenue. So there's really only three factors here. What's the threshold, 550? What's the yield? And what's the price? The 2018 yield was 57 bushels an acre. The price agreed upon between the tenant and landlord was $8.75. And that was a mixture of crop insurance prices, local bids over multiple months. $8.75 was the agreed upon price. I added $1.65 to that. Do you recall why we added that? That was the MFP1 payment for 2018 production, $1.65 a bushel, paid in 2 increments of about 80 cents a piece. So the final effective price was $10.40. The lease allowed and accounted for crop insurance revenue and government program revenue to be included in the computation of the base gross revenue threshold. So the actual revenue was $593 for this farm. They exceeded the base by $43. The landlord received a third of that and collected a $14 per acre bonus rent payment. So the final rent, $214 for the 2018 crop year. I mentioned the base rent was paid early, during planting season. The bonus rent was not collected until February or March of the following year in 2019, when yields and prices and everything was known. So this is one opportunity to have a good discussion with your landlord, who's obviously seeking better returns, who's looking for the best return that their operation can provide per acre. But if they're willing to maybe share some risk, maybe they're willing to share in some profits without putting all of the risk on the tenant, who might be obligated to put out $225 an acre rent, all up front, all fully accepting the risk. So consider risk as you discuss with landlords. Consider the benefits that they might have in a cash arrangement as opposed to farming themselves or in a crop share arrangement. This is not the only type of creative flex lease that exists, but it's just one I wanted to share with you in detail today, so you have at least something in your pocket you can use to think forward about 2021 plans that might be helpful as you manage business operations. Well, this slide's one I've never created before. I've done a lot of presentations, but I thought about this and I thought, what was the world like in 1980, 40 years ago, which was, as Jesse mentioned, I've been doing this since 1984, so I missed this fun time period, I think. But what happened while I was in college in 1980 on the U of I campus? What was the tax rules like? I had no idea. I was farming on my own a little bit, and just a student, had so a little income, taxes were not a worry to me at all. But here's a really unique piece of how tax policy has changed dramatically in this generation. In my career here with FBFM, notice what's happened. So let's start with 1980 first. That's the year that I was married. I would have loved to had an AGI of $215,000. I think my wife Debbie would have enjoyed that too very much, but we weren't. We were much lower, below $16,000, I'm sure. But there were several tax brackets in 1980. I couldn't even print them all on the slide. I think there were 24 different tax brackets applicable, and you'll see that the first $3,400 was tax-free, and then once you reached $11,900 of income, you went out of the 18% bracket to the 21% bracket. Well, you see the numbers. Look at that. $85,000, 54% federal income tax rate applied, 70% for high earners above $215,000. And I know then that was a really high income level 40 years ago, but think of a 70% rate. On the left-hand side of the screen are 2020 tax rates. And there's two numbers there in percentage numbers. So the first is the official tax bracket, 10% if you're between $0 and about $20,000. These are married filing joint tax rates, by the way. The paren number is the QBID rates. And I know Jesse and Emily had talked to you earlier about QBID, but it's the 80% of business net income rate. In the Tax Cuts Act of 2017, signed in December of 17, they issued this 20% reduction that if you're in business, you pay a slightly lower rate on your business income. That's a whole nother 3-day seminar about what all that means. But the important piece here is the effective rate, if you're in business, is really 8% in the first $20,000, and it's effectively a little less than 30%, even for the highest income earners in the bracket. I think we have 7 tax brackets here. I didn't put everyone on the chart for you, but we've had a collapsing of the brackets and a big reduction in the rates that are applied to these brackets. And that's not the whole story. I mean, you have to look at exemptions and what types of deductions and depreciation rules are allowed. I get all of that, but that's more involved in this simple slide. But I had forgotten in my economics classes in college of these high tax rates that existed at the beginning of my work generation and how much they've shifted in the last decade and even in the last 2 years with the application of the Q.I.T tax rates. So have you ever thought of the IRS as your partner? I don't know that I do often, but we deal with a lot of tax issues with FBFM, and we know the IRS and the Department of Revenue have a big stake in the final net take-home pay you have as a farm family. They have an impact on your net worth statement. So understanding the tax rates and how they've evolved, what they mean for your family, is a critical piece of understanding your overall financial obligations. And I really don't want to leave the note of saying the IRS is a part of your business relationship, but we know that it is, and we know it's one that we need to find out the best manner of looking about how we're going to conduct our business going forward. Interesting slide about tax rates and how much they've changed. As we move to the I part of the GRIT message for today, I labeled that as innovation. I can't imagine there's been a required, more rapid, more broad, more diverse application of innovation in today's world than what you've experienced since mid-March. As you've adopted the meetings just like we have today, as David mentioned early on, this was planned to be a live seminar with me walking around the room and sharing things with a nice, neat laser pointer. But we're doing it from my office in Camp Point, and I'm sure you've had many Zoom activities in the last 6 months, and you'll have many more coming forward. That's one piece of our innovation. I know you've had to innovate how you're acquiring your daily supplies, how you're communicating with your landlords, how you're signing documents with your lender, how you've done things to navigate the variety of government programs that exist and must be adapted to your farm operation every month. Innovation is at the highest level, but as I mentioned my grandfather earlier, as I think about what I learned from him from the 1960s and forward, innovation is a part of every farmer's daily life. We used to think about electrical tape and baling wire and those things as maybe how to innovate some pieces. And today we're thinking about Zoom calls, we're thinking about electronic messaging, we're thinking about electronic commerce. But certainly innovators and farmers go hand in hand. And I'm impressed with what I've heard from all the farm stories I've witnessed from our field staff in the last few months about the innovative ways that business is being conducted. And we just got to keep grinding on that. We've got to find the right relationships to make our innovative opportunities as maximum opportunistic as they can be. We need to strive on innovation. I know you're working on it every day. Just my reminder that it's here, it's happening, and man, we've got to really crank it up to be strong innovators to be a farm family success story in 2020. Well, one of those things I want to connect the dots here between the tax rates I just talked about and an innovation piece I think that is critical for your farm financial analysis thinking. I'd like you for the moment to think about what your taxable adjusted gross income should be. Not the fact of what your tax return looks like at the end or how much tax that you want to pay, that you're willing to pay, that you're okay with paying. All of those discussions are fair as well. But think in reverse for a moment. What should your taxable income be, and why is that important? As we think about the calculation of adjusted gross income, it's essentially all of your receipts minus your operating expenses minus depreciation, and that's essentially your adjusted gross taxable income. And out of that money, you've got to cover the things I show on the screen. Family living cost, I use an average of 85,000. Maybe yours is 60, maybe it's 120. 85 is a good place to think about it. If you have that type of income, your tax liability might be around $15,000. So we're up to 100 so far of non-deductible cash expenses incurred by your checkbook that have to be met by AGI first. And then one final piece, principal that's greater than your depreciation. If you're making payments on land purchases, for example, that don't come with any or very little depreciation deductions, buying that land over time by making principal payments increases your AGI, increases your tax liability. So in my case, in my example I showed here, 120,000 is the adjusted gross income required for this farm operation to meet their needs that they've identified in this example. And so to the extent their AGI is below 120, what have they done? They've kicked the can down the road. They've delayed the recognition of that income. They've put off the tax liability to sometime later. And as we've seen from the slide, that's been a generally great strategy for farm families. Who would have wanted to pay 70% tax in 1980 when you could have paid 27 or 29% tax in 2020? Tax deferral has been a hallmark of farm operations, and it continues to be true today. You know, over my whole career, tax rates have declined, except for a couple of blips up, but they've generally declined. So deferring tax has been a good, sound financial strategy. But just recognize the fact of what are your needs for AGI, and know that if you're reporting less income than that, which is okay, no problem with that at all. Maybe you're utilizing accelerated depreciation to help with that. But be cognizant of the fact that that is delaying that recognition of income till some later date. And maybe the rates will be lower, great idea. Maybe the rates will be the same, probably still a great idea. Is there risk that rates might be higher? Well, perhaps. And so maybe deferring that would be an incorrect step if you thought that was the indicator. But think about in reverse. What do you need to operate your business, and see if you can manage the tax liability associated with that without putting pressure on the future? Monitoring your working capital, we hear about this a lot. I just want to give you a very quick example of how you do that. So net farm income is the first measurement. We subtract out living and income taxes out of those items. And in this case, we had a negative 20,000 working capital adjustment. I was profitable. The farm made money. It just did not make enough money to have a zero impact on my net worth and on my working capital. I needed a $60,000 net farm income to stay even. Just a quick example of how we can look at working capital. This is another good document that our friend Gary Snicky prepared for an FBFM presentation earlier this year. And we were so thankful we did get him to make a presentation in March, the Friday before everything closed down. So we were glad to get one of Gary's last presentations for 2020 on the books for our members. This works our way through the changes from 2019 to 2020 working capital. I want to focus on the middle slide, or the middle table in this slide. Grain operations will boost working capital, non-farming operations, off-farm income, and then there are the uses of working capital. Income taxes, family living, including healthcare costs, capital purchases that are financed with your checkbook, not financed with borrowed money, making debt service payments greater than your depreciation is one example, and any net investment activity that you would gain or lose on. Maybe you've invested money from a grain sale into a personal vehicle. Well, that investment would lower working capital, might not alter your net worth, but would affect working capital. Just a very good detail here of what goes into the factors that address and affect working capital computations. I thought this slide was interesting too. I like to not only see our current financial condition, but also give some comparisons to another recent time period. So I took 3 factors today compared to a year ago. And I was surprised when I looked at the Dow Jones Industrial Average as one measure of economic performance in the US. And today we're 600 points better than we were in August of 2019. Of course, between that 12-month period, we had a higher run up to almost 30,000, and we had a crash in February to about 18,000. So a wide range exists between these 2 measuring points, but I thought interesting here, very similar. The next 2 line items are short-term and long-term interest rates. AFR is the applicable federal rate. These are published by the IRS every month and are used for a variety of financial and tax transactions. Short-term rates in this definition mean 3 years or less in duration, and long-term rates mean more than 9 years in duration. So notice how they've changed, but also notice how the relationship between the 2 has changed. Short-term rates now at 0.17%. I think that's the lowest ever, but it's been extremely low the last 3 or 4 months. You know, 0 we would think would be the bottom, but we have seen instances of negative rates, but for practical purposes, 0 would be the bottom. So we're very near that at 0.17% compared to 1.9 a year ago. The long-term rate, 1.12 today compared to 2.33 a year ago. We've lost 120 points in the long-term rate. We've lost 170 points in the short-term rate. And here's the relationship key. In 2019, you'll notice that those 2 measuring points were about 40 basis points apart. And today, they're about 100 basis points apart. So a dramatic decline in the short-term rates compared to the decline in the long-term rates. What does that mean for us? Think about financing opportunities. I'm sure you've all thought about refinancing real estate, machinery, operating notes. Think about retailer credit. What are those obligations looking like, and what will they look like for the coming year? Do you have any obligations on a contract for deed or with private individuals in financing forms? Those should be reviewed. With all types of major developments, you will see challenges and you will see opportunities. The decline in interest rates is one of the opportunities that exist today as we think about how we deal with our lenders and how we best position our farm operation from a debt capital standpoint going forward. Now, if you're one of those folks who had low debt to asset ratios, the age is 60 plus, these don't look very promising to you, because if we're in that category, we're banking on, hoping for, anticipating higher rates of return for our investments. So those have also dramatically declined. Those affect institutions as well. I serve on our local community college board, and for the last 3 years, we had relied on investment earnings as one piece of our overall budgeting process that helped us hold tuition costs to 0 growth. Well, that's not going to happen the next 12 and 18 months and perhaps longer. These investment income pieces are going to be very limited for those who are savers, those who are in the retirement earnings category, and institutions that many of us serve on that rely on this to help our budgets. Well, here's another kind of interesting quick calculation regarding land valuations. I used a soybean yield of 60, the same price, $8.85, yesterday's price here in Camp Point. That generated gross revenue of $531 an acre. If we assume the landlord gets 35% of that in some flex, in some crop share equivalent, whatever form we think 35% is right, just use those first 4 lines as assumptions. The math I want to demonstrate is the next 2 lines. If interest rates are 3%, that equivalency of a capitalized land value is $6,200 an acre. If interest rates are up to 5%, that has an effect of lowering the land value strictly from an interest rate capitalization factor to $3,700. So as interest rates rise, the land values fall. we're in a mode of interest rates falling. So that would have the implication of perhaps land values rising, even given marginal prices for our commodities. Here's what's happened in land values since 1920. FBFM started in Illinois in 1924. This goes back even a few years before that. The index numbers to the right are published annually, and they'll be out probably next week or within 2 weeks. We'll see the new numbers published. But here's the key fun fact here. The first crash was in 1933 when the value of the index dropped by 1/3 from 9 to 3. We had a double in 1945, 1956, 69, 76, 81, and then we had the second crash in the last 100 years in 1987. The index dropped from 118 to 62, a 50% cut in land values. It then doubled again in 2006, or in 2000 and 2008, and we've been relatively flat since that time period, about 2010 or 11. You'll see 2014 was the peak with an index of 403, and last year we ended at 392. We'd expect 2020 to be similar in a land index number. So several times it's doubled, 2 major crashes in the last 100 years. Do you see another doubling coming for us? I don't think that I do. I see stable numbers coming along the way. Key performance indicators are also a piece that you should be thinking about as you think about your financial operations in an innovative, simple way. So here's the factors for 2019. Out of gross revenue, about 4% went to interest, 75% to operations, 12% to depreciation, leaving a little less than 10% for profits. 2015, you see this shows a small operating profit. That's not quite the same definition as net farm income. And the earlier year, 2009, was an 18% margin. If you're in a retail wholesale business, you think about margins all the time. We don't think about that too much as a farm sector, but this chart helps us think about that in a unique way for 4 key financial key performance indicators that you should be thinking about in an innovative approach to managing your operation. Well, the last few minutes I want to talk about the T in GRIT, and that's the talent piece. There is no doubt that farm families in Illinois have some of the most talented people working on their operations every day. You know the long laundry list of things that you and your spouses and your kids and your employees are doing to produce safe and abundant farm products for food, fuel, and fiber consumption in the U.S. You know there's plenty of talent to go around. I think we're challenged today with grinding out to know that talent, to find the best relationship, to innovate it in a way that's prosperous and use it to the best way that we can. Let me give you just a few slides as we close down our discussion today about talent. So one talent measurement is labor and management. This is really the salary that our farm families have earned in real dollars since 1972. The inflation adjustments are taken out of this piece. And you see in the late 70s, some really strong salaries earned for the people operating farms for their labor and management process. And then from 1980 to 2006, 7, and 8, except for the last couple of years, they're relatively flat, 50,000 plus or minus. Some really strong years there in the early 10s decade, and now pretty choppy the last few years with some falling revenues. So we have a lot of talent. If we're going to bring that talent back home to help us on the farm, we have to be sure that this labor and management income will work for everybody who wants to join our operation. Talent dictates competition. On Friday nights at 7 o'clock, I usually enjoy calling football games on the radio or the public address announcer booth at our local school. And on Friday night football, you see the talent. You know who's tackling, you know who's running, you know who can throw, who can catch. And at the end of the day, you know who put more points on the board. And you know that competition ended with one team favoring the other that particular evening. It's a little harder to measure how well competitors work for our farm families. But it's out there. We know it exists, and we need to embrace that competition. I listed 3 age groups here and just 3 different factors and how wide-ranging the results were for debt to asset ratio. For example, for those farm families under 30, they range from 35% to almost double or more than double that at 69%. So there's a range even in your age group for certain financial characteristics. Identify what yours are and identify the key points where your talent will shine and beat the competition. It might be in more debt managed well. It might be in lowest cost producer. It might be in generating the highest yield and best price and largest revenue you can get. And maybe pieces of all of those. But the challenge I offer you today is think about where your talent lies and how you can embrace and beat the competition. This balance sheet slide shows some results from 10, 15, and 19. The slight dip in working capital here for $30,000 from 10 to 19 over the decade. Even though net worths have increased significantly in that same period, we see a few stressors. Current ratios have declined a little bit. Debt to asset ratios are relatively the same. But notice that if we have larger debts and larger assets, that risk might feel a little differently. Returns the last few years have not been strong, especially against our equity. And the amount of debt that farms own compared to their income available to support that has risen a lot in 2019. You see, in 2010, we had $3 of debt for every dollar of earnings, but in 2019, the debt was $20 for every dollar of earnings. So not to make that seem too biased, I put the 2018 number there too. That was $8 of debt for every dollar of earnings. We just know with the debt amount that exists, you have to generate dollars to produce results. Make your talent work for you. This is an important slide, I think, as well. I'm going to end with just 2 more slides as we talk about the last few minutes. Use your talents to do things better. This chart shows the top 1/3 producers in Illinois and the low 1/3 producers and various results for these operations. So the corn yield, you'll notice, was 10 bushels better for the top 1/3 producers, bean yield 5 bushels, revenue $62 an acre better, crop cost $24 better, power and equipment costs $50 better for the top 1/3. Management returns is the key I want to drive at. 113 versus a loss of 92. That's a $205 swing from being ranked number 33 on the list to number 66 on the list, high 1/3 versus low 1/3. As I mentioned on Friday Night Football, you can see this glaring piece. You can see a running back beating a lineman down the field very easily. Obvious to see. But here it's a little more difficult to see how a top 1/3 measures against a low 1/3 producer. But for many, many years, the results are in that $200 per acre advantage. So work with your financial professional and identify where you are as a high 1/3, low 1/3 producer and what you can do to put more marks in the high 1/3 column based on the talent you have on your farm family's operation. And then in closing, here's my final slide about, again, this is a study that Gary had done about financially resilient farms and what they did, what they viewed as being most important to be ongoing successful operations every year. Attention to detail got the best rating. Lowest number is best. Cost management, maximizing yields, disciplined spending, those were the top 4 factors of being a financially resilient farm family operation. So think about how those apply to your talent. They all fit. How well do you watch details? If you don't, who in your farm operation can do that for you? Who maintains cost control? There's somebody in your farm operation that can help. If there isn't, think about an innovative way to find that. Think about a relationship that might help you with that. All of these pieces are important if you're going to be a financially resilient farmer. All of these pieces I hope that we've talked about today will help you find a way to win the day in 2020, 2021, and beyond. We know you're going to have to grind out things you've never thought about before. Efforts will be maximized, processes will be different, results will be surprising, but we know you'll grind it out and be successful. Find the relationships that will help you reach those targets that you've identified for your farm family to succeed. Be innovative in the way that you're adopting technology, in the way you're conducting business, in the way you deal with others, and in the way you think about your farm financial performance. And think about the talent that you have, the talent that you'll see the rest of today, the talent that will be on your farm during harvest. How will you optimize that talent for the best performance for your farm family success? I wish you all the best and thank you for participating today. Enjoy these beautiful August days. And on behalf of Illinois FBFM and our 70 field staff, our 100 support staff, and the 12,000 farm families we serve, best wishes for a safe, successful, good harvest season. Thank you for the partnership with Illinois Soy and FarmDoc to participate today. Jesse, do you have any questions or things we should wrap up with before I sign off today?
Yes, I do. So we have a question from the audience. So that first question is, should we be more worried about debt to asset ratio or debt to income ratio?
Well, that's a terrific question. And as you would measure, your balance sheet first is where you will find your debt to asset ratio. As you think more about your income statement connected to your balance sheet, that's the debt to income ratio piece. And so the first one is more of a measure of how much risk are you willing to accept? Are you willing to borrow another $1,000 and increase that debt to asset ratio? Or is your risk tolerance $100,000? Do a pro forma balance sheet by taking your current total assets and your current total debt and adding two same numbers to both of those and recalculating your debt to asset ratio. That will give you your risk tolerance. The debt to income ratio measures your comfort with cash flow. Will you have enough ability to service that debt going forward? And will you be comfortable with that amount of payments required for that piece of property that you've purchased? I think today's current issue is greater with debt to income, cash flow, and making payments. It's a little less worrisome about debt to asset issues in the farms that I see. But two really strong pieces that mesh well together. Terrific question.
So kind of a follow-up question to that, what do you think would be the number one go-to tool for a farmer when they are considering the financial health of their organization, and how can they continue to monitor the health throughout the year? So are we looking at that cash flow? Are we looking at a projected budget? Just generally speaking, what kind of information are you looking at to monitor the health of an operation over the year?
Yeah, great thing to be thinking about, absolutely. So I think it begins with the very basic piece of a complete and accurate balance sheet on the close of your fiscal year activity. That's the starting point. You also then would add to that an accrual income statement that's going to measure your performance in the prior year. That will help with measuring a lot of your efficiency factors, your profitability factors. Third, I would add to that your cash flow projection for the coming year, but I would take that a step further and I would call that a projected income statement for the coming year. And if I was working on that today, I'd probably be thinking about my projected income statement for 2021. If I've got my balance sheet done well, I have a good income statement for 2019, and I have a handle on what's happened so far in 2020, I should be ready to start making financial projections for calendar year 2021. And that budget, that projection, that cash flow, pro forma, whatever you might call that forward-looking financial statement is really the key now that you've got the basics behind you. That forward-looking statement will let you look into the future, make financial decisions in advance of production cycles, in advance of purchase requirements. And then that will do one other thing for you. At the end of 2021, when you prepare your accrual income statement, you'll have a projection that you can compare with, match with, decide what worked well, what did not work well. And the more often you make a projection and test that with actual results, your management skill will increase, your ability to forecast results will grow, and your ability to have a successful business will expand in ways that I think you will really enjoy. Great, great observation on a piece to pull that together, Jesse.
So as we're projecting our cash flows, we should also be projecting our capital debt repayment capacity through that cash flow, correct? So if we're looking at a projected farm income statement, we find that net income, we have some add backs and also some subtractions, but what does the capital debt replacement capacity tell us? And how can we use that in discussions with our bankers?
Yeah, it's another great tool that helps both identify your performance on the farm, plus also provides a valuable piece of information to your lender on what types of expansion or retraction things are necessary for your business. So the CDRC, I didn't have a slide for that today, but it's your net farm income. We would reduce that net income by living expenses and taxes. We would include there all of your debt service requirements. We would add back the interest that you pay, and then you do a calculation on both the margin, which is a percentage, and the total dollars that are available. That CDRC number then tells you and your lender how much debt can you service. And that ties back to the issue about how much debt is on your balance sheet compared to earnings. And depending on the terms of the debt, the interest rate of that debt, all that plays together to measure how much debt you can adequately service with your projected profits. Looking back for 2 or 3 years of history is very helpful to set a baseline, but paying that debt has to come from future earnings. So that CDRC is another terrific tool that on 4 or 5 lines of calculation can give both the producer and the lender a really good, clear picture of financial performance and indicates things that might need to be adjusted, either in expansion or retraction.
Yeah, and I think you just mentioned a very key piece there about looking at multiple years and not just one specific year to evaluate the health of your farm,
Sure.
Your general operation. So that's another key piece there. We're going to switch to other.
As you saw some of the farm results, you know, they varied a lot the last few years. 2012 record high, 2015 worst year ever. So making long-term decisions on 1 year's performance is inadequate. So a trend is or an average is very helpful for that. Correct.
Yeah. So we appreciate those comments. I just want to switch to a different topic for a minute here. So can you give us a general feeling of what you think the footprint of this stimulus packages that we've recently received are in our agricultural community? And how much do you think the average farmer is benefiting from that? I know that I have a feeling that that's been a huge benefit and capital infusion into our industry. And I just wanted to get your comments about that.
Well, I think so too. I think the purpose of the economic stimulus programs, which came from the CARES Act primarily in March and April, and it turned into the dollars being submitted by the Paycheck Protection Program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. All of those have been, I think, front and center for folks more recently the last 90 days. And we know that the PPP program was designed to assist in maintaining payroll, as well as providing a maximum of $20,833 for the owner compensation replacement. So even self-employed folks could benefit from that. The idle piece was not as great as we had hoped. Initially, that was set at a $10,000 grant that would be taxable, but yet available to producers. That got reduced to $1,000 per employee, and now it's tied in with the PPP, so it reduces that to some degree. We did have a few producers around the state I know who participated in the EIDL loan program, which is a 30-year term at 3.75% interest, no payments for 1 year. So there are producers who benefited from that, the financing piece. You know, I'm not sure what the total PPP impact on Illinois agriculture will be, but I'm pretty sure it's more than $50 million. And I think it's been a great piece that's come to do the things it was designed to do, to bolster employment, to keep farm families profits at some degree of reasonableness for that time period. But we're expecting more of those things to come. There are several pieces of legislation in the Congress today being debated to extend, expand, alter those programs. So for those, I would say stay tuned and see what happens, if anything, the next few days. But there's a lot of debate happening right now as we speak on those topics. The CFAP payments, I think that was a mixed bag depending on your condition, on where you stood on January 15th or between January and April. I think it was probably a much bigger benefit to some of our livestock producers, which is appropriate. And we're working to find ways to increase CFAP dollars again to continue subsidies that come out to cover some of the drastic pandemic price and production losses that have occurred.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And I just kind of want to wrap up with a general question here. You know, we've been dealing with a lot of different challenges throughout 2020 so far, and we've touched on a lot of those, but do you feel there's anything lingering that some of our ag business owners, stakeholders could be maybe forgetting about, given all of these other crazy things that have been happening? Is there something maybe lingering in your mind that you don't want the operators to lose sight of, or anything in that realm?
I think this means it's a time for measuring things more frequently and more precisely than we've done before, about yields, prices, revenue, net profits, debt repayment capacity. I think as we work our way through harvest and put into the bin this 2020 crop and start to look back at expenditures, think about capital replacement budgets, think about family living needs, think about income tax planning, I think the piece that will be front and center for everyone will be a sharper pencil, better resolution on your Zoom call with your accountant person. I think just a more precise and probably more frequent measurement. And I think now is the time to be thinking about 2021 forecasts, maybe even 22, 2023 looks ahead generally on what that happens. As Gary released today, the 2021 crop budgets, that's a really good sign for us to start thinking about 2021 in earnest. And I just know that we'll have a variety of things in our books and records that we've never had before, and recording, accounting for, paying taxes on, PPP, EIDL, CFAP, crop insurance program payments, and things we've not even dreamt about yet that are likely to come to us before the end of the year. I think understanding those, staying tuned in, having the right relationships will be important for farms to succeed in the next 90 days to 15 months. Good topic, Jesse. Great one there.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing all of those comments. That's all the time that we have for questions right now. I want to say
thank goodness. I was hoping you didn't have 6 more behind there. You have some really hard questions, Jesse. Now, Jesse.
Thank you to everyone for joining, and we want to especially thank our sponsor, Compeer Financial. And thank you for just a quick thank you to our AMP partners, Illinois Farm Business Farm Management, the University of Illinois, and our Farm Doc team there, the Illinois Soybean Association Checkoff Program. The recording of this presentation will be posted to the ISA webinar archives on YouTube and sent to all attendees via email this week. Please take a few minutes at the conclusion of this webinar to answer the survey. Those help us to improve our program and the additional agribusiness resources that we can offer you. And thank you for attending today, and have a great day.